Between 1847 and 1852, three of the most prominent plantation families in the Tennessee River Valley of northern Alabama fell into utter ruin, destroyed by circumstances so disturbing that local newspapers refused to print the full accounts. 23 people perished across these estates, some claimed by fever, others by accidents that defied all explanation, and several under conditions a county coroner could only describe as unnatural cessation of vital functions. The common thread connecting these tragedies was buried deep within ledgers, letters, and testimonies that judges ordered sealed for more than a century. And at the heart of every catastrophe stood one woman, a name written in ownership papers, household inventories, and eventually criminal proceedings. A woman whose true story was deliberately concealed by families desperate to preserve their reputations, and by a legal system unwilling to face what her existence revealed about the very foundations of Southern society. Before we continue with the story of Rachel, a woman whose intelligence and determination would expose the darkest contradictions of antebellum Alabama, I want to invite you to join our community of truth seekers. Subscribe to Liturgy of Fear and hit that notification bell so you never miss these hidden chapters of American history. And please, leave a comment telling us what state or city you're listening from. We love knowing where our audience connects with these forgotten stories. Now, let's uncover what really happened in those grand plantation houses along the river. What began as a simple estate transaction in spring of 1847 would ignite a chain of events that three families tried desperately to stop, even as they found themselves powerless against the very forces they had created. Limestone County in northern Alabama had flourished through the 1840s on the wealth of cotton cultivation, with the Tennessee River carrying their harvests to the bustling markets of New Orleans. Three families dominated the social landscape of the county's eastern townships. The Rutledge family owned Fairmont, a 2,400-acre plantation worked by 87 enslaved people. Samuel Rutledge had arrived from South Carolina in 1838, bringing with him family wealth and connections to the state legislature. His wife, Catherine, came from Virginia and carried herself with aristocratic pride. Their household included three children, two sons studying at university and a daughter, Lydia, 19 years old, already drawing the attention of neighboring planters' sons. 5 miles upriver, James have ill-maintained Riverside, a slightly smaller but far more modern estate. He was 43, served as a county magistrate, and harbored political ambitions that demanded careful protection of his public image. His wife, Margaret, was 10 years younger, and together they had 4 children. The third family, the Crenshaw household of Oak Ridge, lived with less pretension but far greater efficiency. Daniel Crenshaw, a widower of 51, manages 1,800 acres with meticulous attention to profit. His 3 children were grown, and his household revolved entirely around agricultural production. In April of 1847, Samuel Rutledge traveled to Mobile to attend an estate sale. Among the items being liquidated were 37 enslaved individuals. One listing caught his eye, a woman named Rachel, approximately 24 years old, described as house-trained literate, skilled in needlework and music, fluent in French and English. Her sale came by special decree, with one unusual stipulation. The purchaser must take her at least 100 miles away from Mobile. Even more curious, the price was remarkably low, just $400, when skilled house servants often fetched $1,200 or more. Rutledge's interest was practical. His wife needed someone capable of training their daughter in the refined arts of society. A French-speaking, educated servant would fill that role perfectly and serve as a symbol of status. The low price and distance requirement hinted at complications, but the auction agent assured him it was merely a technical matter of estate law. And so, Samuel Rutledge purchased Rachel and arranged for her transport to Limestone County. When she arrived at Fairmont 3 weeks later, Catherine was pleased. Rachel was tall, light-skinned, and carried herself with a quiet, unsettling composure. She spoke with proper deference and demonstrated flawless competence from the first day. Catherine assigned her to instruct Lydia, teaching her French conversation and the delicate refinements of needlework. For 6 weeks, everything appeared perfectly normal. Rachel was exactly as described: quiet, efficient, and remarkably adept at managing the intricate rhythms of the household. But by June, subtle changes began to stir. Lydia Rutledge spent longer and longer hours with Rachel, whispering, then falling silent when others entered the room. Conversations throughout the house became strained. Servants moved with unease. What no one realized was that Rachel had begun to ask careful, seemingly harmless questions about cotton prices, which planters paid their debts on time, which families had eligible daughters, which sons gambled or drank too much. Each question, in isolation, meant nothing. But piece by piece, Rachel was assembling a map, a quiet, intricate web of power and influence stretching across Limestone County. She noticed that Samuel kept a ledger of heavy gambling debts in his study, and that he had begun borrowing against future crops at ruinous interest. She saw that Catherine's polished manners barely concealed her growing financial fear. Most importantly, she recognized that young Lydia, romantic, naive, and eager to be admired, possessed vulnerabilities that could be shaped, guided, or exploited. By July, Rachel had become indispensable. Catherine relied on her for every social obligation. Samuel valued her precision and efficiency. Lydia saw her as a confidant, perhaps even friend. The other servants had accepted her presence as natural. On the evening of July 14th, 1847, Samuel sat alone in his study, his account spread before him. The numbers worse than he dared admit. Rachel entered quietly to bring him coffee. As she turned to leave, she paused. "Sir," she said softly, "if I may be so bold, I overheard you mention the Havill family at dinner. I once served in a mobile household that did business with Mr. Havill's brother. There are matters concerning that family's finances you may find useful to know." Samuel looked up sharply, then gestured toward the chair across from his desk. Rachel sat composed and calm and began to speak. She told him of failed speculations, concealed debts, and partnerships with men of questionable repute. Rachel presented these facts without a hint of emotion, her voice calm, detached, like someone reciting an inventory list. Samuel should have wondered how a mere house servant could possess such intimate, intelligent insight into the affairs of powerful men. But he didn't. The information was too valuable, his desperation too sharp. For the next hour, every answer she gave was precise, verifiable, consistent, undeniably real. By the time Rachel rose to leave, Samuel had already made his decision. He would use what she told him to coerce Havill into a business arrangement, one that could rescue him from financial ruin. What Samuel could not grasp was that, in doing so, he had just made himself dependent on a woman who had already spent 8 years methodically dismantling the lives of 3 families who had owned her before the Ruttles. She had been sold with that peculiar distance requirement because authorities in Mobile had finally recognized the pattern, but, lacking any lawful proof, could do nothing more than force her removal. That night, as a violent storm swept across Fairmont, lightning struck the great oak near the main house, splitting it clean down the center. July 14th, 1847. The date would mark the beginning of a chain of tragedies so severe that the state legislature would one day intervene, creating legal precedents for prosecution of enslaved people in crimes the law could barely define. Samuel Rutledge began his plan with the reckless confidence of a desperate man. On July 22nd, he called upon Havill under the polite pretense of discussing equipment investments. After the formalities, Samuel casually mentioned rumors, troubling whispers about land speculations Havill had entered back in 1845, dropping details so specific that Havill's hands tightened on the arms of his chair. The information was accurate. It involved business ventures he had publicly claimed were closed without loss. If word spread that he'd acted dishonorably, his position as county magistrate would collapse overnight. Samuel proposed a cotton factoring partnership, terms that, he said, would be mutually protective of both our interests and reputations. It was extortion dressed up as commerce, and Havill knew it. For 30 tense minutes, the two men maintained the appearance of friendly civility. Then, at last, they reached an agreement. Havill would invest $3,000 to settle Ruttle's immediate debts, and in return, Rutledge would use his political influence to support Havill's ambitions. Samuel left that meeting certain he had saved his family's future. He never thought to question how Rachel had obtained such dangerous knowledge. Rachel received the news with quiet satisfaction, never mentioning that her intelligence had not come from the business world at all, but from months of subtle listening. Enslaved people carried news between plantations, gossip, financial secrets, personal scandals, information that white families never dreamed could travel beyond their walls. The other servants had begun to notice Rachel's elevated position in the household. The cook, Bess, watched her with growing unease. "That woman ain't right," Bess whispered one evening. "I seen this before down in Mobile. Had a cousin work for a French family there. Told me about a woman just like her. Said 3 families broke apart. People died, and nobody could prove nothing." The others dismissed Bess's fears. Rachel had done nothing wrong. She'd simply earned the master's trust. What they didn't know was that Rachel had already begun the second phase of her plan. And this time, her focus was Lydia Rutledge. Through August, Rachel continued her lessons with Lydia, but the subjects began to shift. Their conversations turned from grammar and etiquette to darker, more dangerous ideas. She spoke of the limitations placed on women in Southern society, of the injustice of a world that treated both enslaved people and planter-class women as property to be controlled by men. She drew careful parallels between a slave who could be sold to settle a debt and a daughter who could be married off to secure a partnership. Lydia had never heard such word before. Rachel gave voice to feelings she had never dared to articulate: resentment at having no control over her own fate, frustration at being valued only for her marriage prospects. "Your father is negotiating your future like a business transaction," Rachel told her one afternoon. "He has decided you will marry the Crenshaw boy to secure a partnership." Lydia's eyes widened. "How do you know this?" she whispered. "I see the letters in your father's study," Rachel replied smoothly. "The Crenshaw boy drinks too much and carries gambling debts, but your father needs his capital. So your preferences, Miss Lydia, do not matter." It wasn't entirely true. No formal arrangements had been made, but Rachel presented speculation as certainty, knowing Lydia had no way to tell the difference. "I don't love Thomas Crenshaw," Lydia said quietly. "Love," Rachel replied, "is not a consideration in these arrangements. You are inventory, Miss Lydia, valuable inventory, but inventory nonetheless. In that regard, you and I are not so different." Over the following weeks, Rachel cultivated Lydia's sense of injustice while offering sympathy and understanding. She encouraged her to keep a private journal, to write her thoughts freely. She spoke of women who defied convention, who claimed the right to choose their own paths. Rachel was building something, an ideological foundation for rebellion, the emotional groundwork for actions that would shatter the Rutledge family from within. By September, Samuel's partnership with Havill had begun to strain. The factoring scheme required far more capital than projected, and Havill's resentment simmered just beneath the surface. He grew uncooperative, irritable. Then Rachel approached Samuel with new intelligence. "Mr. Havill has been speaking privately about your debts, sir," she said, her tone grave. "He means to ruin you. He's seeking ways to damage your reputation, so he might withdraw without appearing dishonorable." Samuel's rage was instant. That same evening, he confronted Havill publicly at a meeting of the Agricultural Society. The argument erupted into scandal. 2 respected men shouting accusations before half the county's elite. Rachel had achieved exactly what she intended: conflict that would consume them both. Meanwhile, she continued her quiet work with Lydia. On September 18, 1847, Lydia disappeared from Fairmont. She left behind a note, a declaration that she would no longer be bound by her father's plans, that she was leaving to seek a life of her own choosing. The note's language was unmistakably foreign to her voice. filled with phrases about natural rights and female autonomy. Catherine recognized immediately as Rachel's influence. The plantation erupted into chaos. Samuel organized frantic search parties. Catherine collapsed from nervous exhaustion. Every enslaved person was interrogated, some beaten. Rachel displayed appropriate shock and grief. She wept convincingly, claimed ignorance, offered comfort. Her distress seemed genuine. The search went on for 3 weeks. Notices appeared in newspapers. Rewards were posted. Reward were offered. Havill, ever the politician, quietly spread rumors. Whispers that Samuel Ruddle's poor management of his household had allowed his daughter to fall under the spell of dangerous ideas. But the truth was far darker. Lydia hadn't left entirely of her own free will. Rachel had spent months preparing her mind, gently twisting her thoughts, shaping her defiance. Then, through her secret contacts within a hidden network of free blacks and escaped slaves, she arranged Lydia's departure. Lydia believed she was taking control of her destiny. In reality, she was being manipulated, used to strike a devastating blow at her family's honor and social standing, while Rachel achieved the next stage of her plan: chaos. Chaos that would blind the Ruddles to the wider web she was already weaving. While search parties scoured the countryside for missing girl, Rachel was already cultivating her next target. She had met Daniel Crenshaw at a social gathering that August and immediately impressed him with her intelligence, her poise, and her quiet dignity. Crenshaw, a widower whose household lacked any female presence, found himself drawn to the idea of acquiring a servant of Rachel's refined accomplishments. In late September, he approached Samuel with an offer to purchase her. Samuel, desperate for funds to continue the search for Lydia and crumbling under paranoia, agreed. Rachel was sold to the Crenshaw estate, Oak Ridge, for $900, more than twice what Samuel had paid. The transaction brought Samuel temporary relief and Rachel a new stage upon which to perform. On October 3, 1847, she departed Fairmont, leaving behind ruin. Lydia gone, Samuel's finances collapsing, Catherine's health broken, the family's reputation shattered beyond repair. From the kitchen doorway, Bess watched the carriage vanish into the gray horizon. She crossed herself and whispered, "Lord have mercy on the Crenshaw family. That woman carries destruction like a plague." And she was right, because by the time Rachel arrived at Oak Ridge, Daniel Crenshaw, a man who prided himself on his practicality and his immunity to emotional manipulation, had already purchased the instrument of his own destruction. The October rains came early that year, cutting off the plantations from one another. In that isolation, Rachel settled into her new home, her mind already turning. She had destroyed one family. 2 more remained, and the most devastating phase had not yet begun. Daniel Crenshaw's Oak Ridge ran with mechanical precision. Since his wife's death in 1842, he had stripped away all pretense of social grace, dedicating himself entirely to agricultural efficiency and profit. His 3 children, Margaret, 23, William, 21, and Samuel, 19, had been raised to value hard work, discipline, and practical knowledge. Rachel immediately recognized that this family would require a different strategy. Daniel could not be swayed by feminine charm or social pretense. He valued skill, competence, and results. His children, especially Margaret, were better educated, more observant, less easily influenced than the naive Lydia Rutledge. So Rachel adapted. She became indispensable not through beauty or refinement, but through flawless efficiency. She managed household accounts with precision, identified cost reductions, and even advised on agricultural decisions. Within weeks, Daniel found himself consulting her on matters far beyond domestic concerns: crop rotations, cotton prices, equipment investments. Her competence began to unsettle Margaret. Since her mother's death, Margaret had been mistress of the house, managing operations with quiet authority. But now her father deferred to this new servant, this stranger. Margaret was intelligent, disciplined, and practical, but she also possessed what others lacked: suspicion, "Father," she said one November evening, "do you not find it strange that this woman possesses education far exceeding what one might expect from someone sold at such a low price?" The Rutledge catastrophe began not long after they acquired her. Perhaps that's coincidence, but perhaps it isn't. Daniel brushed aside her concerns with irritation. The Rutledge catastrophe, he said, was a result of Samuel's own poor management. Rachel has been nothing but an asset here. I'll not indulge in female hysteria over coincidences. Margaret said nothing more aloud, but inwardly her distrust deepened. She began to watch Rachel closely, quietly. She noticed the way Rachel's eyes tracked conversations, the questions she asked the field hands, her sharp attention to visiting merchants and correspondents. Nothing obvious, nothing incriminating, but something was wrong, something she couldn't name. Margaret couldn't know that Rachel's approach this time was far more patient, more refined. She understood that Daniel could not be manipulated through vanity or insecurity. He had none. His children could not be turned by emotion. They'd been raised to value reason over feeling. To destroy this family, Rachel would have to find their real weakness, not invent one. By early December, she had found it. While reviewing the plantation's records, she noticed irregularities. Daniel had been borrowing modest amounts, not enough to raise suspicion, but enough to suggest persistent financial strain despite apparent prosperity. He was paying steep interest on short-term loans that would become unsustainable within 2 years. Rachel recognized the pattern immediately. Daniel was investing in something beyond plantation's day-to-day operations, something costly enough that he needed to conceal it. She began her investigation with the patience of a predator. By late December, she had uncovered the truth. Daniel Crenshaw was attempting to purchase additional bottomland, a massive expansion that would nearly double Oak Ridge's size, but he lacked the necessary capital. He was gambling that cotton prices would remain high long enough to pay off the debt before it swallowed his estate whole. It was valuable information, but Rachel didn't act on it yet. Knowledge alone wasn't enough. She needed leverage, something that would give her control over how that information detonated. Her opportunity arrived in January of 1848 in the form of James Havill. The collapse of his coerced partnership with Samuel Rutledge had left Havill vulnerable, drowning in his own debts. Desperate for recovery, he sought new alliances. He knew Daniel Crenshaw to be the most financially stable planter in the county. And so, in mid-January, he called upon Oak Ridge with a proposal for a cotton factoring partnership. Rachel was there, serving refreshments, appearing silent and deferential, but her mind caught every word. Havill's desperation was obvious. His offer was generous to the point of recklessness, and Daniel was tempted. The partnership would provide the very capital flow he needed to secure the new land, without revealing how deeply he was already overextended. After Havill departed, Rachel saw her opening. She approached Daniel privately. "Sir," she began carefully, "I do not presume to involve myself in such matters, but when I served at Fairmont, I learned that Mr. Havill destroyed Mr. Rutledge through deliberate manipulation and false dealing. The partnership became a trap, one that ruined the entire Rutledge family. But that confrontation would come too late to stop her. By the summer of 1848, Rachel had already achieved what no one believed possible. She had dismantled 3 of Alabama's most powerful plantation dynasties without ever lifting a hand in violence. Yet, the final stage of her plan was not merely ruin. It was reckoning. James Havill, stripped of wealth and reputation, had become desperate. Word of his failed dealings spread through the county, whispered in drawing rooms and trading posts alike. His creditors pressed harder, as once iron control began to crack. Rachel knew he was the perfect final instrument. His pride would lead him exactly where she wanted him to go. In June, she began seeding rumors through her network of servants and freedmen, tales suggesting that Havill blamed Daniel Crenshaw for his financial collapse. They spoke openly of revenge and of taking back what he was owed. The whispers reached Crenshaw's ears within days, and Rachel watched the transformation. Suspicion turned to rage, and rage to paranoia. She fed each man's fears with surgical precision. To Daniel, she murmured that Havel had sworn to ruin him utterly, that he meant to burn Oak Ridge before letting another man profit from his fall. To Havel, through intermediaries, she ensured he heard that Crenshaw called him a coward and thief unworthy of his former standing. Each believed the other plotting violence. On the night of July 9, 1848, events unfolded exactly as Rachel had designed. Havel, armed and half-drunk, rode to Oak Ridge demanding to confront Daniel. The argument escalated into chaos. A struggle, a pistol's flash, and moments later, both men lay bleeding on the veranda floor. One dead, one dying. The household erupted in panic. Rachel stood in the doorway, her expression unreadable. She neither screamed nor wept. The law arrived days later, bewildered by what they found. 2 ruined men, 3 destroyed families, and a woman whose only crime was existing within their world. The courts debated for months, searching for precedent. How could a slave be held accountable for manipulation, deceit, or psychological warfare? No statute fit the enormity of her acts. Some called her a witch, others a demon in human form. But there was no charge, no trial, and no punishment. Rachel was sold again quietly to a distant parish, her reputation preceding her like a shadow. Within a year, Oak Ridge was abandoned. The Rutledge estate lay bankrupt. The Havel lands passed to creditors. And among the enslaved who whisper at night beside dying fires, the legend of Rachel grew. They said she carried vengeance in her blood, that she could read the hearts of men and turn their sins against them, that she never raised a weapon because her mind was sharper than any blade. And somewhere, far from Alabama's red soil, a woman known only as Rachel began again. When the men came that night, they found not a sleeping household, but silence, too complete, too deliberate. The quarters were dark, the air thick with tension. As they moved through the yard, shapes shifted in the shadows, dozens of eyes watching from behind trees, fences, and sheds. The first sound was a low cry of a whippoorwill, Rachel's signal. Within seconds, torches ignited across the slave quarters, flaring into sudden light. The abductors froze, blinded and disoriented. Figures emerged from the darkness, men and women armed with tools, axes, and farm implements, blocking every path of escape. At the center stood Rachel, calm, unafraid. The firelight caught her face, turning her expression into something almost unearthly. "You came to steal what is already owned," she said evenly. "You came to drag me away because you fear what I know. But you forget, fear burns hotter than chains." The leader of the intruders, a man named Callum Bess, raised his pistol. Before he could fire, a brick struck his arm, sending the shot wild into the night. Chaos erupted. 2 of the men fled immediately. The third was dragged down, beaten senseless by field hands. Callum stumbled toward the stables, only to find Rachel already there, torch in hand. "You should have stayed away," she whispered. She dropped the torch into the dry straw. Flames leapt upward, catching the rafters in seconds. The men fled into darkness. By morning, only ashes remained of the Oak Ridge stables, and the bodies of 2 of Havel's hired abductors were found burned beyond recognition. The incident shocked the county. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some claimed the slaves had revolted under Rachel's command. Others whispered darker things, that she'd cursed the men, that the fire had moved like a living thing under her control. Sheriff Yarborough was summoned again, but this time, even he hesitated. "You want me to arrest a woman for surviving a kidnapping," he said. "You sent men to take her by force, and 2 died doing it. What law do you think I can use to punish her for that?" Havel's fury became obsession. He wrote letters to every authority he could reach, from county judges to the state legislature, demanding her removal, her execution, her destruction. Each response was the same: no crime, no jurisdiction, no case. By October 1848, Rachel's legend had overtaken the truth. Among the enslaved, she was spoken with awe and fear, a woman who turned her master's sins upon them. among white planters. She was a ghost story told to children. Obey, or Rachel will come for you next. But for Rachel herself, it was not legend. It was purpose. She had destroyed the Rutledges through greed, the Crenshaws through pride, and the Havills through wrath. Each family had crumbled under the weight of its own corruption. And as she stood among the ashes of Oak Ridge, the autumn wind carrying the smell of smoke and cotton, Rachel finally smiled. Her work in Alabama was finished. Yet whispers soon followed. Rumors that a woman matching her description was seen boarding a riverboat in Mobile before winter set in. That she was purchased again, this time by a New Orleans merchant family. And within 3 years, that family too would be gone. Would you like me to continue the story from her arrival in New Orleans in the same detailed tone? When the men arrived, they found not a helpless servant, but a coordinated defense. Field workers armed with farming tools, standing their ground. The confrontation was short, but brutally violent. 2 of the would-be abductors were seriously wounded. The rest fled into the night. Moments later, Daniel Crenshaw appeared, shotgun in hand, and ordered the attackers off his property. In the aftermath, Havill's role in the attempted abduction came to light through the confession of one injured man, desperate for medical aid. Havill was arrested and charged with attempted theft of property, specifically the attempted theft of Crenshaw's slave. The irony was savage. The man who believed he was protecting the county from a dangerous threat now stood accused of a crime. Rachel, who had orchestrated so much chaos, was legally the victim. But Rachel wasn't content with that outcome. The abduction attempt had given her exactly what she wanted, an opening. What no one yet understood was that she had engineered the entire incident, provoking Havill deliberately, ensuring his plan would fail, and setting him up to take the fall. With Havill exposed, Rachel positioned herself to deliver the final blow, the complete destruction of all 3 families, in a sequence of events beginning in October 1848. At the heart of this new plan was something unexpected, a growing affection between Rachel and Samuel Crenshaw, Daniel's youngest son. Samuel was 19, idealistic, and unlike his father or brothers, he saw Rachel not as property, but as a brilliant, tragic woman trapped in an unjust world. Over months, Rachel carefully nurtured his sympathy, feeding his quiet doubts about slavery, painting herself as a soul deserving freedom. Samuel was falling in love, and Rachel knew it. She encouraged his affection with precision, never enough to spark his father's suspicion, but always enough to deepen the bond she could later exploit. That moment arrived in late October, when she told Samuel that Havill's men were planning another abduction, this time to silence her permanently before the trial. It was a complete fabrication. No such plot existed, but Samuel believed every word. Rachel claimed that her only hope was to flee Alabama, that if someone could help her escape north, she could finally live free, her intelligence valued rather than feared. Driven by love and conviction, Samuel agreed. He began to plan her flight, contacting anti-slavery sympathizers, gathering supplies, and preparing routes. He was committing crimes: theft of his father's property, conspiracy to violate fugitive slave laws. Yet in his mind, these were acts of righteousness. Rachel let the plan develop just far enough. Then, on November 3rd, 1848, she betrayed him completely. She went to Daniel Crenshaw, feigning loyalty, and revealed everything: the supposed plot, Samuel's letters, forged papers, every shred of evidence he would need. Her betrayal was surgical and absolute. That evening, Daniel confronted his son. Samuel broke down and confessed everything: his love for Rachel, his hatred of slavery, his plan to run away. He begged his father to set Rachel free and let them leave together. Daniel's response was swift and merciless. He declared his son mentally unfit and had him committed to a private asylum near Tuscaloosa. And finally, recognizing the danger his wife had long warned of, Daniel arranged for Rachel's immediate sale to a trader bound for the Deep South. The sale took place on November 8th. Rachel was chained in a coffin with 15 others, bound for Mississippi. As the wagon rolled away from Oak Ridge, she looked back at the Crenshaw estate. Daniel rigid with fury, Margaret vindicated yet broken, and the enslaved community watching in silence. Rachel spoke a single sentence before she disappeared from view. "Everything I did, you made necessary." For a brief moment, it seemed Rachel's reign of destruction was finally over. She was gone. The families she targeted were shattered but still standing. The legal system had found its way to remove the threat without ever facing the deeper questions. But this was not the end. Rachel had left something behind, a mechanism that would ignite even in her absence, unleashing deaths that could no longer be dismissed as coincidence. Just when we thought we'd seen the full extent of Rachel's cunning, the nightmare in Limestone County deepened. If this story is giving you chills, share it with a friend who loves dark mysteries. Hit that like button to support our work, and don't forget to subscribe. There are more stories like this waiting to be uncovered. The first death came on November 23rd, 1848, exactly 15 days after Rachel's departure. James Havel was found dead in his study at Riverside, a gunshot wound to the head. At first glance, it appeared to be suicide. He was alone when the shot rang out. The weapon was his own pistol. A note on the desk expressed despair over his impending trial and financial ruin. But Margaret Havel didn't believe it. She swore her husband would never have taken his own life. Only days before, he had been preparing his legal defense, confident of acquittal. The wound, a shot to the right temple from a man who was left-handed, made her doubt even more. And then there were the missing papers, vital documents that might have proven his claims about Crenshaw's fraudulent dealings. Sheriff Yarborough investigated, but found nothing. The house had been locked from the inside. There was no sign of forced entry, and no witnesses saw anyone approach. Officially, the death was ruled a suicide. Privately, Yarborough was relieved. A scandal avoided. No need for another public trial that would humiliate powerful families. Margaret refused to let it rest. She hired a private investigator from Huntsville, former Pinkerton agent Abraham Cornwall, and ordered him to uncover not just her husband's true cause of death, but the entire web of misfortune that had consumed their families. Cornwall was methodical. He interviewed servants, examined business ledgers, and traced Rachel's history all the way back to Louisiana. Slowly, he began constructing a timeline, one that placed her shadow at the scene of every tragedy that had struck since her arrival. Cornwall's December report was devastating in its conclusions, but maddening in its legal implications. "The woman known as Rachel," he wrote, "has systematically destroyed the Robichaux, Beaumont, Delacroix, Rutledge, and Crenshaw families through psychological manipulation, calculated revelation of damaging truths, and the precise exploitation of human weakness. Yet under Alabama law, she has committed no crime. She had merely offered advice that white men chose to follow their own free will. She had spoken truths, not lies. Every action she took fell within the narrow limits of agency permitted to an enslaved person, and yet she wielded that sliver of power with catastrophic precision." Regarding James Havel's death, Cornwall reached a chilling conclusion. "While I cannot prove murder," he wrote, "the circumstances suggest deliberate design by someone intimately familiar with Havel's habits, Riverside's layout, and the timing necessary to make murder appear as suicide. Rachel's physical absence is immaterial as she orchestrated the act or applied pressures that drove Havel to take his own life." Margaret Havel brought Cornwall's findings before Judge Peyton, demanding justice. The judge agreed that Rachel represented a singular threat, but confessed helplessness under the law. "Mrs. Havel," he said, "even if I accept every word of this report, what charge could I bring? She was in Mississippi when your husband died, without evidence of communication or planning. The law recognizes no crime here. There is simply no category for what this woman has done." While Margaret Havel fought a losing legal battle, the Crenshaw family was collapsing. Samuel remained confined to the asylum. Doctors reported that he had grown withdrawn and vacant, barely speaking, showing no spark of his former self. Daniel visited him once in December and was shaken by the sight of his son sitting motionless, eyes hollow, responding only in whispers. Margaret Crenshaw, who had warned her father from the beginning, watched her family's downfall with a bitter sense of vindication. She joined forces with Margaret Havel, and together they petitioned the Alabama legislature to create new laws addressing crimes of psychological manipulation by enslaved persons. Their petition gathered some support, but just as much opposition. Planters understood the dangerous precedent it implied. To recognize that enslaved people could commit crimes through intellect rather than violence was to admit their reason, their agency, their humanity. And the entire system of slavery depended on denying exactly that. The debate was still raging when the second death struck. On January 17, 1849, Daniel Crenshaw was found dead inside the cotton gin house at Oak Ridge. The machinery had somehow engaged while he was inspecting it, crushing him instantly. The death was ruled accidental, but Margaret Crenshaw knew better. Her father had handled machinery all his life. He was cautious to a fault. The gin could not have started on its own. And someone had been at Oak Ridge that day, a former field hand who'd been sold months earlier, suddenly reappearing, claiming to bring a message from the trader who now owned Rachel. Margaret immediately reported her suspicions to Sheriff Yarborough. The sheriff investigated, though reluctantly. He found no proof of sabotage. The visiting field hand vanished the very next day. Telegraph inquiries to the Mississippi trader brought denial. He'd sent no messenger, and Rachel had made no such request. Frustrated and exhausted, Yarborough closed the case. "Miss Crenshaw," he said quietly, "I believe your father was murdered, and I believe Rachel arranged it, but I cannot prove it. The law demands evidence, and all I have is a pattern, a chain of tragedies that make no legal sense." Now united completely, the two Margarets pooled their resources and hired Cornwall again, this time pursue a single question: where was Rachel? Cornwall began his search in February 1849. He tracked her to Mississippi and located the plantation where she had last been sold. What he uncovered was unsettling. Rachel had stayed there only 8 days before being sold again, this time to a trader bound for Arkansas. Cornwall followed her trail through 3 more transactions over 4 months, always arriving mere weeks too late. Finally, in March 1849, he found her in eastern Texas, owned by a planter named Henry Dalton. Cornwall requested permission to question the enslaved woman for Alabama's ongoing legal inquiries. Dalton, curious about the case, agreed. The interview lasted 2 hours and left Cornwall shaken for the rest of his life. "She answered every question," he wrote. Calmly, precisely. She recounted her time with each family, describing her methods with the cold logic of a strategist, how she studied every household, identified weaknesses, and seeded discord until they turned upon themselves, how she built networks of information among enslaved people who moved between plantations, how she crafted long-term strategies to ensure complete destruction, all while maintaining perfect deniability. When Cornwall finally asked her why she had done it, Rachel's answer was chilling. "Because I could," she said. "Because they thought themselves superior. Yet I was smarter than all of them, because they bought and sold human beings while calling themselves civilized. And I wanted them to feel what it's like to be destroyed by someone they believe beneath them, because slavery makes us enemies. And in that war, I fought with the only weapons I had." Cornwall pressed further. "Did you arrange the deaths?" he asked. Rachel smiled faintly. "Mr. Cornwall, I was hundreds of miles away when both men died. I sent no messages, gave no orders, committed no act the law could name as crime. If those men died, perhaps they died from the consequences of their own actions. Or perhaps those they enslaved found their own form of justice. You cannot prove I did anything, because under your law, I can do nothing. I am property. Property has no agency. Property cannot commit crimes," Rachel said coldly. "Your laws created this world. Now you must live within it." Cornwall requested that Dalton keep Rachel under guard until he could return to Alabama with new legal orders. Dalton refused. "She is my property," he said flatly. "No charges have been filed. You have no authority here." And that was the end of it. Cornwall returned to Alabama in April 1849, his hands empty but his conscience burning. He presented his findings to Judge Peyton and to a special legislative committee in Montgomery. The committee listened, and the more they heard, the more unsettled they became. Debate stretched over 3 days. Some lawmakers demanded new statutes, laws defining a crime as seditious manipulation. Others objected that such laws would be unenforceable, and worse, that they would set a precedent acknowledging enslaved people as capable of rational, independent thought. A few saw the terrible irony for what it was. The legal system of the South had created an entire class of people defined as property, without mind, without will, without humanity. And now, that same system trembled because one of those objects had demonstrated superior intellect while remaining untouchable under its own design. The debate had reached no conclusion when the third death struck. On May 2nd, 1849, Samuel Crenshaw was found dead in his asylum cell. He had hanged himself with bed linens. Doctors reported that his mental state had worsened in recent weeks and that suicide had been a growing concern, but none believed it imminent. When the news reached Margaret Crenshaw, it shattered her completely. Her father was gone. Her brother William had drifted into poverty and disgrace. And now Samuel, gentle, idealistic Samuel, had taken his own life 2 years earlier. The Crenshaws had been among the most respected families in northern Alabama. Now they were ruined. Margaret knew Rachel was responsible. She could not prove it, but in her heart, she knew. And that knowledge hardened into a single, burning decision. She would go to Texas. She would find Rachel, and she would kill her with her own hands. It would not be justice under the law. It would be vengeance, but it was all that remained. On May 15th, 1849, Margaret Crenshaw departed Alabama, carrying a single suitcase, a loaded pistol, and an iron determination that she would end Rachel's reign, even if it cost her her life. What she did not know was that Rachel was no longer in Texas. 2 weeks earlier, Dalton had sold her again, this time to a Louisiana planter connected, through distant family ties, to the original French Creole household in Mobile that had once owned Rachel, long before her trail of destruction began. Margaret reached eastern Texas in early June after a grueling 3-week journey. She went straight to Dalton's plantation, prepared to confront her enemy. What she found instead stopped her cold. "She's gone," Dalton told her bluntly. "Sold her to a cotton factor out of New Orleans 3 weeks ago. Found her snooping through my business ledgers. Couldn't risk keeping her here." He handed Margaret a name, Guillaume Marchand, and an address in New Orleans. Margaret wasted no time. She rode south, crossing Louisiana border in blistering heat, determined to follow the trail to its end. In New Orleans, she learned that Marchand had purchased Rachel not for himself, but for a client, a widow living near Lake Pontchartrain. The woman's name was Elise Delacroix, the remarried widow of Louis Delacroix, the very French Creole planter whose estate sale in Mobile had first brought Rachel into Alabama 2 years before. When Margaret heard the name, she went cold. The circle was closing. Rachel had returned to the place where everything had begun, to the family whose ruin had marked the first of her known deceptions. Margaret traveled to the Delacroix estate and arrived unannounced on June 24th. She demanded to see both Elise and Rachel. Elise received her in a quiet parlor overlooking the lake. After a long, tense exchange, she agreed to summon Rachel. When Rachel entered the room, Margaret was stunned. There was no fear in her eyes, no defiance, only recognition. And something deeper. Sadness, regret, a strange peace. "Miss Crenshaw," Rachel said softly, "I knew someone would come for me one day. I just didn't know it would be you." What followed was a conversation that lasted nearly 3 hours. Elise remained present the entire time, and years later, both women would give testimony about what was said that afternoon. Margaret began with a single question. Why? Why had Rachel destroyed her family? Why the deaths, the deceit, the devastation? Rachel's reply was a story, calm, relentless, and unbearably human. She began not in Louisiana, not with the Robichaux family, but 15 years earlier, in Virginia. I was born free, she said. In Richmond, my father was a free black craftsman, my mother a French woman. She taught me to read and write, to sew, to play music. My childhood was modest but comfortable, as much as any free colored child could hope for in the South. When Rachel was 16, her father died in a workshop accident. Within months, white creditors descended on the estate, producing falsified papers that claimed her mother and she were not free at all, that they were slaves he'd been harboring illegally. The law sided with the papers. My mother was dead within a year, Rachel said, and I became property. Bought, sold, branded in ink and ledger, transformed from a free, educated girl into a possession, and all of it was legal. Her voice never rose. It didn't need to. I was not born to slavery, she continued. I was not raised to accept it as natural. I knew I was human. I knew I was intelligent. And then one morning, because white men decided it, I was an object. Tell me, Miss Crenshaw, what does that do to a person? She paused, eyes glinting in the light from the lake. To know you are the equal, perhaps the superior, of those who own you. To know that society calls you property when your mind is freer than theirs will ever be. Rachel described the years that followed, the rage she buried, the despair she hid, and the slow, cold realization that while physical escape was nearly impossible, there were other ways to fight. Each sale taught me something, she said. How they think, what they fear, their weaknesses, their greed, their pride, their hypocrisy. By the time I was taken to Louisiana in 1839, I understood what must be done. If I could not be free, she said quietly, I would make them understand what it feels like to lose everything. I would at least make them pay, Rachel said. I would show them that the people they considered property were capable of destroying them completely. I would prove their assumptions of superiority were delusions, and that their power came not from any inherent worth, but from legal structures that could not protect them from someone who understood those structures better than they did. She described her methods plainly, the calm voice of someone who had rehearsed the calculus of ruin 100 times. She watched families for months, learning their secrets, mapping relationships, identifying the thin places where pressure would break them. She cultivated intelligence networks among other enslaved people, messages and gossip carried between plantations like small, sharp knives. She made herself indispensable through genuine competence, so owners came to trust her with confidences. Then she began the work of destruction. Sometimes she fed the right person a true fact at the precise moment. It would turn allies into enemies. Sometimes she whispered to a vulnerable soul, encouraging self-destructive choices. Often she planted seeds that sprouted only months later, poisonous fruit ripening when the household could not imagine a hand that sowed it. Always she maintained plausible deniability. Nothing could be traced back to her in ways the law would recognize as criminal. The beauty of it, she said, with something almost like pride, is that I never had to lie. Everything I told each family was true. I simply chose which truths to reveal and when. Samuel Ruddle's gambling debts were real. James Havel's betrayals were real. Daniel Crenshaw's financial overreach was real. I did not create their weaknesses, she said. I simply exploited them with strategic precision. Margaret interrupted, her voice barely controlled. And the deaths, my father, James Havel, my brother Samuel, were those also just strategic exploitation? Rachel was silent a long moment before answering. Your father's death was not my direct hand, she said, but it was my design. I arranged for information to reach people who had their own reasons to want him gone, debts unpaid, promises broken. I made his movements predictable and the gin house unguarded at a certain hour. Someone acted on that. I do not know who. Havel was similar, she continued. I never told anyone to kill him, but I ensured his despair was complete, that he saw no path forward, and that individuals who feared exposure knew he held papers that would ruin them. Whether he ended his own life or someone else finished him is immaterial. The outcome was what I intended. And your brother? Margaret demanded. Rachel's voice softened. Samuel was different. I did not intend his death. I broke him emotionally to protect myself from his foolish rescue plan. But I never meant for him to die. That was regrettable. The word regrettable ignited Margaret. Fury snapped through her. She drew the pistol from her traveling bag and leveled it at Rachel, demanding Elise leave the room so justice could be done. Neither woman moved. Rachel met Margaret's stare with steady, unblinking eyes. "You will not shoot me, Miss Crenshaw," she said quietly. "Because if you do, you will never know the rest of the story. You will never understand why Madame Delacroix purchased me for this very purpose. To hear my confession." Margaret kept the pistol trained, but forced herself to demand explanation. Elise answered. "My first husband, Louis Delacroix, was destroyed by this woman between 1843 and 1846. Elise said, voice low. His business failed, his health collapsed, and he died believing himself cursed. When I learned she was being sold through New Orleans, I arranged to purchase her through my factor. I brought her here not to continue exploiting her labor, but to hear the full account of her actions. She has spent the past 3 weeks composing a confession, not a legal statement, but complete record of her methods, her philosophy, and her justification." Elise crossed to a desk and retrieved thick sheaves of paper, perhaps 80 pages covered in neat handwriting. She offered them to Margaret. "This document is extraordinary, Miss Crenshaw," Elise said. "It is a meticulous account of how an enslaved woman systematically destroyed 6 prominent Southern families over a decade. It is also a devastating critique of slavery, from someone who experienced both freedom and bondage, who had education equal to any scholar, and who used that knowledge to wage war on the system that enslaved her." Margaret's pistol hand trembled. She lowered the barrel by an inch. "Why would you want such a document?" she asked. "Because I needed to understand," Elise replied. "My husband was not cruel by our society's standards, yet this woman destroyed him. I needed to know whether he deserved it, whether there was moral logic to her revenge, or whether she was simply a destroyer who enjoyed inflicting pain." "And what did you conclude?" Margaret demanded. She looked to Rachel. Elise met Margaret's eye and answered for them both. "I concluded slavery makes women like Rachel, and then act surprised when they use the only weapons they are left." She paused. "I concluded a system that reduces intelligent human beings to property should expect those beings to resist in whatever ways they can. I concluded my husband's ruin was not random cruelty, but calculated warfare by an enemy he never acknowledged as human enough to be dangerous." "That does not excuse what she did," Margaret said hoarsely. "It does not bring back my father or my brothers." "No," Elise agreed. "Nothing can do that, but perhaps understanding can prevent future Rachels from being created." Rachel spoke again, softer now. "Miss Crenshaw, you came here to kill me. I will not stop you if you choose. But consider this. If you kill me, you prove the system works, that white people can destroy black people who threaten them. If you spare me, you prove something worse. You prove you cannot stop someone like me. You prove your legal structures are vulnerable to intelligence you refuse to recognize. You prove slavery contains within itself the seeds of its own destruction." Margaret stood poised, pistol aimed at the woman who had destroyed her family. And for the first time she realized she was confronting something larger than revenge. Rachel was not merely a criminal. She was evidence of a fundamental instability at the heart of the social order. She had demonstrated that an enslaved person could be more cunning than her owners, could turn white men's assumptions and legal protections against them, and could exact a kind of justice no law could foresee. Killing her would solve nothing. The knowledge she possessed, the method she had documented, the confession she had written, none of that would die with her. Others like Rachel could and would appear, driven by the same unbearable contradiction. Intelligence confined by law to the status of property. Margaret felt, with a cold clarity that the act she had intended would only confirm the system's power to crush dissent, while leaving its deepest vulnerabilities intact. She lowered the pistol completely. The room stilled. Around the lake's glittering edge, the world went on as if nothing had been decided in that parlor. But the decision would change everything that followed. Treated as property while possessing the full range of human capacities, Rachel stood in the parlor of the Delacroix estate as Margaret lowered the pistol completely. "I will not kill you," Margaret said finally, her voice steady but trembling with emotion. "But neither will I leave you unpunished. I will take your confession to the Alabama legislature and to newspapers throughout the South. I will make certain every slaveholder in America knows what you have done and how you did it." Rachel met Margaret's gaze without flinching. "That is your right, Miss Crenshaw," she said quietly. "But consider this. If you publicize my methods, you also publicize my humanity, my intelligence, and my moral critique of the system that enslaved me. You demonstrate that we are not the childlike innocence or the savage brutes your society claims. You show that we are fully human, capable of sophisticated thought and strategic action. That knowledge may be more dangerous to slavery than any act of violence I could commit." The confrontation ended there. Margaret took custody of Rachel's confession, and Rachel remained at the Delacroix estate, her future uncertain. Margaret returned to Alabama with the papers, determined to bring them to official attention. In 1850, the Alabama legislature enacted new statutes addressing crimes by enslaved people involving psychological manipulation. But these laws were vague, difficult to enforce, and ultimately ineffective. They acknowledged the problem Rachel represented without solving it, because a fundamental contradiction remained. Admitting that enslaved people could commit sophisticated acts required acknowledging their intelligence and agency, the very qualities the institution of slavery relied upon denying. Rachel herself disappeared from historical records after 1850. Whether she remained with Elise, was sold again, escaped to freedom, or died, cannot be determined from surviving documents. She vanished into the anonymity of the enslaved population. Her precise fate is unknown, but her impact was lasting. For the family she destroyed, no legal resolution could repair the damage. Samuel Rutledge never recovered from the collapse and died in 1853. Lydia was eventually located in Ohio in 1851. Living under an assumed name and refusing to return to Alabama, Margaret Havill remarried in 1852, attempting to rebuild her life far from Limestone County. Margaret Crenshaw never married. She devoted her remaining years to managing what was left of the estate and to privately documenting Rachel's actions. In 1867, after the war ended slavery, Margaret wrote in her journal, "I have spent 18 years trying to comprehend that woman. I understand her methods now and her motivation. What I cannot reconcile is that I find myself almost admiring her, even as I hate her for what she did to my family. She was an enemy of great intelligence and determination, and she won our war completely." Margaret died in 1871, leaving behind boxes of documents related to Rachel's case. These papers were eventually donated to the Alabama Department of Archives, where they remained largely unstudied until the 1960s. The confession itself was briefly accessible to researchers in the 1970s before being restricted again. Scholars who examined it described it as one of the most sophisticated first-person accounts of slave resistance ever written. One passage from Rachel's confession appears repeatedly in historical works, an explanation of why she chose psychological manipulation rather than physical violence. "I could have killed individual owners with poison or in their sleep. Many enslaved people have done so and been caught and executed, but individual murders change nothing. They are replaced by new owners, and the system continues. I chose instead to destroy families completely and visibly, to demonstrate that intelligence is a weapon more powerful than violence, and to prove that the people white society considers property are capable of sophisticated resistance that their laws cannot address. I wanted them to fear our minds more than our hands, because they can chain hands, but they cannot chain thought. This story reminds us that intelligence and determination can be weapons as powerful as violence. But it also shows a terrible human cost of the system that denies people their basic humanity. What do you think of this story? Do you believe Rachel's actions were justified resistance or inexcusable destruction? Leave your thoughts below. And if you enjoyed this tale and want more hidden chapters of American history like this, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share with someone who loves mysteries that challenge our understanding of the past. See you in the next video.